used to come up what is now called Airport Road, but at that time it was called Main Street Road. The Highway 11 bypass wasn't here then. So you had to come right past this airport, or what looked like it might have been an airport. At that time there was one hangar, I believe, with an airplane in it, and it was an Oaco. It was a Oaco UPF-7 that sat in a ramshackle hangar. One day I stopped and walked back in there and looked at the airplane. Finally met Bob Green one day, who owned the airplane. 1973 maybe. This all is pretty hazy now, it's so long ago. Built a small shack with a flat roof that where this building sits now, and started doing a little work on airplanes. And about that time, I decided maybe I needed a hangar, so I built a hangar then, which I think was in 1974. The property that the two buildings sat on, I bought from John Cooley, who was another old-timer out here. He was a charter member of the chapter, had a Luscombe. And John had bought about an acre in here where he wanted to build a house. But his wife said, no, we're not building a house on an airport. So he sold I managed to buy the acreage from him for $600. And what you see right in here is ours. I have since sold the property to 4 of my sons, the hangars and the buildings and the property, and they let me stay here and goof off in my retirement. Don Cooley, who I bought the property from, actually came up with the idea of forming an EAA chapter, so I can't take credit for that. Although I did make some calls, and some people, Kent Journalin, Bill Knight, I can't think of who else it might have been, had heard about it. And the first 2 meetings were at my house, and I think there were probably 11 or 12 people there. We decided to go ahead with it, formed a chapter, got our charter, and it became EAA Chapter 431.
Then, in the very early 70s, Dick Wheaton and Bill Knight and quite a number of people became interested in flying, and they formed Chapter 431 of the Experimental Aircraft Association. And also, about that time, Wheeler got sick with cancer. And it was terminal. Now, the people in Chapter 431 that crafted the lease with Wheeler, and Wheeler helped make it too, were very wise. It was I wish I had a copy here. I guess you don't want to take time to look at it anyway, but it was a very well-written lease, and it, on top of everything else, it gave Chapter 431 the right to buy it, and it stated the price. Well, Wheeler died, and the lease was continued by his daughter and the executor of his estate, who was Ray Hum. I had a hangar out there, old hangar. It's the chapter hangar now, by the way. And back of the hangar, my wife and I had a fire ring. And we had 4 children, and we quite often on a summer night had a fire there after flying. Well, around that fire ring is where the idea of this purchase of this airport happened.
And thanks to Gumbar, when he first came to the meeting, he says, you know, this is for sale, we should buy it. And we all laughed, I included. And as I recall, Vern Canizo was the secretary then, secretary and treasurer, and I think we had $19 in the treasury, stamp money. And everybody laughed. Well, Frank, how are we going to buy an airport with stamp money? 300 an acre, 80 acres. And he said, you come back the next meeting. I got a plan. I'll explain it next meeting. And he did. And what he did was sent out an exploratory letter. We had then something like, somewhere between 75 or 85 members. And he sent a letter out to all the members. And here's the plan. How many shares will you buy at $100 a share and to buy the airport? And these exploratory letters came back right and left. I'll take, like, the young guys that had house payments or whatever, maybe 3 or 5 shares, and some of them 10 shares. And Ed Dish was one of Earlywine's students at Albany, a wealthy farmer. And he wrote a letter, he said, I'll take 40 shares. P.S. If you need more, come and see me. And anyway, Gumbar got to adding up these pledges from the exploratory letter. And I think it totaled 24,000. So then again, Frank is on the ball. And Frank says, now, if we buy with our surplus monies that other 1,300 feet. So anyway, we bought 300 feet wide by 1,300 feet, and that gave us a runway then of 3,200 or 3,400 feet. And that's why we've got how we happen to come by the third runway.
In the Brodhead Independent Register of Thursday, November 27, 1975, an article reported that a group of pilots and aviation enthusiasts have incorporated to buy the Brodhead Airport facilities from Arthur Searles and Judy Searles Baldwin. Pictured here from left, reading clockwise, are Judy Searles Baldwin, Dan Baldwin, Lee Buchanan, Bill Knight, Kent Jornaline, Bob Reese, Dan Witchelt, Francis Gumbar, and attorney Ronald Brown. With the additional land, an east-west runway was constructed. In these photos, we see farm equipment from the Batisher family, which was used to build the new runway. With the purchase of the airport land, a chapter building was constructed. On Saturday, September 10, 1988, EAA Chapter 431 held a dedication ceremony to dedicate their new chapter building. In this photo from the dedication ceremony are shown Tim Earlywine, brother of Bob Earlywine, Oliver Earlywine, Betty Earlywine, Gerald Earlywine, and Dick Whedon. Dick Whedon also presented a plaque to the Batisher family for their contributions to the chapter building and also to the Brodhead Airport. Now, with Chapter 431 in existence, the Brodhead Airport grew, and it grew, and it grew. The history of the Brodhead Airport following the formation of Chapter 431 was mostly a history of the fly-ins. The first Brodhead Airport fly-in was held on June 10, 1976. Here, Pat Whedon is sitting on the running board of an old car often used as a target in a flower bombing contest. At the second annual Brodhead fly-in, Ray Miller proudly displayed his Volksplane, powered with a 40-horsepower Volkswagen engine. Ray is probably more famous for his pork chop and fish boiled dinners. He still serves at Brodhead fly-ins today. At the June 1980 fly-in, the Spirit of St. Louis replica was featured, along with the Stinson Chase plane that made the national tour in 1977, commemorating the 50th anniversary of Lindbergh's flight. The Stinson SM-8A was piloted by American Airlines captain Jim Barton. Vern Jobst, who piloted the Spirit, dressed up like Charles Lindbergh and told the story of that historic flight. Sue Knight and Bob Reese from the Brodhead EAA chapter are pictured here along with Tony Goetz, the mechanic that helped build the Spirit replica. The 6th annual Brodhead fly-in featured a 1946 Taylor craft owned by Ed Dish, Kent Jornaline, and Bill Knight. This airplane was purchased by Ed Dish from Bill Earlywine's dealership in 1946. This Taylor craft won the Best of Type award at the EAA convention in Oshkosh 5 years in a row. The June fly-in became open to the public in 1998. Francis Saunders explains the purpose of the June fly-in, drive-in, pancake breakfast.
Hey, I'm here with Francis Saunders. Francis was the chapter president when the pancake breakfast got started, and I thought I'd ask you, Francis, why it was that this idea came into your mind, and it's certainly turned out to be a good one.
The reason, the two big fly-ins are, we'd sort of discourage the public because we're so crowded with guests. The Pete and Pole fly-in and the antique fly-in. 300 or 400 people, and we haven't got room for local or time to give them any attention. So the idea, well, let's have open house, pancake breakfast, and invite the public, and then we welcome the townspeople as well as anybody else that wants to drive in or fly in. So that was the idea. Treat the townspeople to airplane rides or look around, whatever you want to do, and it worked out really good.
Okay.
The pancakes are always a big hit at this fly-in, and the pancakes fly almost as much as the airplanes. Here, Harold Frank is loading some children into a Stinson airplane that are going to be given a ride by pilot Jeff Fink.
Clear!
Those kids must have wanted more, because when Jeff landed the Stinson, he quickly turned around and headed back to the runway. I imagine those children were hollering, "Jeff, let's do it again." The grassroots fly-in started in 1979. This 1929 Spartan, owned by Ed Wagner of Plymouth, was a big hit at the 1980 fly-in. Dick's machine was one of 3 of these type still flying. Al Kelk proudly displayed his Stearman at the Midwest Antique Airplane Club fly-in held on September 14, 1998. It took Al 27 years to restore the Stearman, which is now hangared at the Brodhead Airport. This machine has a 220 horsepower J5 Whirlwind engine, the same kind of engine Charles Lindbergh used on his historic flight across the Atlantic. Al Kelch noted there are only 5 of these engines operating in the world today. 4 of those 5 were at the 1998 fly-in. The Antique Fly-In today is a gathering for the Midwest Antique Airplane Club. In 1976, Francis Saunders, Dick Whedon, and Don Buckman decided to have a fly-in for Pete and Pole owners. Bernard H. Pete and Pole designed his airplane using a Model T engine. Bernard had only an 8th grade education. Aeronautical engineers of the time said it could not be done. But today, Bernard Pete and Pole is credited with producing the first really successful 2-seater airplane powered by an inexpensive and readily available automobile engine. The group from Brodhead wanted to have the fly-in at Cherry Grove, Minnesota, where Bernard lived. Bernard wrote a letter indicating his health was not very good, and the field at Cherry Grove was very small. So the Pete and Pole fly-ins were held at the Brodhead Airport. At the second annual Pete and Pole fly-in, held in 1977, Mr. and Mrs. Pete and Pole were the guests of honor. At the 1995 fly-in, a DC-3 landed at Brodhead Airport to drop off a passenger who was interested in attending the Pete and Pole gathering that year. This DC-3, with a wingspan of 100 feet, was probably the largest